Saturday Night Live premiered on October 11th, 1975, the same night as Game 1 of the World Series between Pete Rose's Big Red Machine and my beloved Boston Red Sox. I turned 6 2 weeks earlier. I have one hazy memory from that shutout victory for the Red Sox in Game 1. It was Louis Tiant teetering around the bases, somehow scoring while wearing a puffy blue warm-up jacket. It was amazing. Was I sleeping later that night when John Belushi declared his intention to feed his fingertips to the Wolverines? Of course I was. But the 75 Red Sox were my first favorite baseball team, and SNL eventually became one of my favorite TV shows ever. For the rest of the 1970s, SNL thrived in some alternate universe that just would not include me. We all knew about the show in school. We knew it was funny. We noticed the commercials. We knew our parents stayed up to watch it. But we couldn't sample it until 4th grade because something special happened that year. That's when Best of SNL shows started popping up in primetime as fillers for NBC's canceled shows. Suddenly, the nerds, the coneheads, the wild and crazy guys, the cheeseburger guys, they all became part of our lives. Needless to say, I loved everyone. I loved everything, but I really loved John Belushi. The Samurai Guy, Joe Cocker, the Chocolate Donuts commercial, the "but no" update monologues. This human being actually existed every week on some show way past my bedtime? How is this fair? How could I watch more? How could I get there? We didn't have DVR, YouTube, or social media in 1979, as you could probably guess. Once that week's SNL host said goodnight, the episode vanished into thin air. The only time you would watch it again is if it was in a rerun that summer. So I was out of luck until fate intervened. That same winter, my parents separated, and I became an only child with an insane amount of leverage. Leverage used for self-serving proclamations like, I don't care what my bedtime is. I'm staying up late for Saturday Night Live. So one of my first live SNL shows was hosted by Margot Kidder during Kidder's brief apex between Superman and Amityville Horror, 2 movies that I like. You wouldn't remember this apex unless you're over 50 years old. But one of SNL's underrated traits as an American pop culture institution, it catches 90% of our most famous actors, actresses, and musicians at the exact point when they are precisely the most famous. Think about that. The most famous. That's SNL. The best sketch from that show, Kidder's Lois Lane character threw a birthday party for Bill Murray's Superman character. And she invited some various superheroes to come along, and I'm watching it live. I'm just sitting there waiting for my guy Belushi. And at the 3-minute mark, the doorbell rings. Kidder opens the door. There's Belushi. Strolls in cackling. He's covered in green. He's dressed like, oh my God, he's dressed like the Incredible Hulk. And even now you can listen for the audience laughing and clapping just at the mere sight of John Belushi, because in 1979, there was no safer comedy wager in America than John Belushi as the Incredible Hulk. So he ambled over to Superman, shakes his hand, screams in mock pain, oh, let go, let go, let go. And then later he annihilates the bathroom with an Incredible Hulk poop as everyone recoils in horror. He comes out. Come on, take it easy. It's not supposed to smell like roses. I never laughed so hard in my life. This was done. This was a wrap. I had a new favorite guy, I had a new favorite show. I stayed up for a few more season 4 episodes, and then Belushi left. He left with Dan Aykroyd for Hollywood, but I still watched all of season 5. Once NBC started airing 1-hour Best of SNL shows on Wednesdays in the fall of 1979, suddenly kids like me could retroactively experience every famous sketch. Did NBC realize? Did they realize they were cultivating the next generation of SNL diehards? Of course they didn't. This was the same year they trotted out Supertrain. There wasn't a dumber TV network than NBC in 1980, so we can call it a happy accident. But that summer, I made my father bring me to 2 R-rated movies, Caddyshack and The Blues Brothers, just to see Chevy and Murray and Belushi and Aykroyd. And that fall, we bought a cumbersome VCR, and SNL became part of my life for good. Over the next 5 decades, the most important sketches and moments hinged on 4 impossible to totally measure questions. Factor number 1, what was the impact in the moment? For instance, you might have a personal history of the Wayne's World franchise that's colored by 2 movies and a whopping 19 SNL sketches. You heard me, they did 19. Maybe Wayne and Garth stopped making you laugh 25 years ago. I sure hope not, because we're doing Wayne's World on Monday's Rewatchables. It still holds up, by the way. But the first Wayne sketch happened on Leslie Nielsen's February 89 show, not long after Mike Myers joined the cast, when he was simply the guy in the credits who had the same name as the killer from Halloween. That's how we knew him. Then they did Wayne's World. Everything killed. Wayne killed, Garth killed, the whole cable show in a basement angle killed. You watched the sketch in the moment, you thought, I want more of these guys. Do this sketch again. And for me, in the moment matters more than everything else. You know with more cowbell, Barry Gibb talk shows, Star Trek convention, Mr. Belvedere, you always know right away with SNL. So that's factor number one. Factor number two is the sketch still funny right now? Little less important because comedy, sometimes doesn't age that great. Sometimes the things we thought were funny in 1994, we don't think are as funny now. It's also hinging on something that happened in the moment sometimes, which is like one of the last Wayne's World sketches ever, which happened in 1994's Heather Locklear show, yet another host Apex. And in the sketch, Wayne starts dreaming that he ended up in Melrose Place. Now, this is something that would make no sense to anybody who's under 40 and can't remember Melrose Place if they watched it in 2025. But in the moment, it was one of TV's hottest shows. Sandler parroting Billy, the Pee-Whip boyfriend, was the highest of high comedy. You have to believe me. Everyone despised that Billy character, only the internet didn't exist yet, and we couldn't properly ridicule him. So Adam Sandler spoke for everybody. And that matters, even if the sketch itself hasn't aged well. Factor number three, does the sketch have any belated significance that transcended the sketch itself? Okay, here's a good example. Will Ferrell's first SNL season, 1995-1996. That followed the critically reviled season 20, which nearly submarined the show and left New York Magazine's infamous takedown cover story as its enduring legacy. How about that as a legacy? That summer, NBC makes a fuss. They're blowing up the cast. They're blowing up the writing staff. And you had a real sense the show was on life support, which would have been the third time in 20 years. We felt that way. So season 21, Meryl Hemingway is hosting the first episode. I'm visiting my buddy Jim Grady in Connecticut, and we play shuffleboard until 4 a.m. at Sam's in Port Chester, where I'm still the GOAT. One of those nights when I woke up on Sunday morning with my contact lenses still in my eyes, unable to remember how I ended up on the sofa and wondering why I didn't have a blanket. Nobody else was awake. I loaded up SNL on Jim's TV, and I watched through bleary eyes as Ferrell's first big sketch comes on, Get Off the Shed. And again, I'm hungover as all hell. I could barely see, and this new cast member is jumping right off the screen at me. Who is this guy? He dragged at least 4 wheezy post-cigarette binge cough laughs out of me, and at some point, Jim heard me laughing and rolled out of bed, and I immediately replayed Get Off the Shed for him. And now Jim was saying, who is this guy? Later, Ferrell plays a husband who kept coming up with off-color excuses to derail his wife and get her off the phone. That character was funny too. Combining the impact of those two sketches, you knew that your life in 1995 was suddenly 0.77% better with this Will Ferrell guy. You knew right away. And 2 decades later, Get Off the Shed isn't one of Ferrell's 10 funniest SNL sketches. Husband Excuses probably doesn't crack the top 30. But that first episode mattered. There was a new sheriff in town. You needed to start watching SNL every week again. And that matters in the big scheme of things, right? So that's the third factor. The fourth factor, it's a cousin of in the moment. Did you know immediately that something truly spectacular had just happened? All right, let's go back to 1975. Richard Pryor is about to host the 11th episode. They've already banked 10. SNL has already established itself as TV's most groundbreaking show. No comedy show belonged to the baby boomer generation until SNL showed up. This is a generation that devoured Rolling Stone. They devoured their rock music. They hated Vietnam and Nixon. They revered George Carlin and Richard Pryor. They loved improv. They loved Harvard Lampoon. They despised traditional sitcoms and variety shows like Carol Burnett. They needed their own show. So after 10 episodes, Lorne Michaels, figures out a show-to-show structure for that specific audience that barely looks different than the one today. Sketches, weekend update, music, comedy performances, short film, basically in that order. I don't think he ever intended the show to reach 30 million people some nights, but who the fucking predict this shit? So Pryor was that generation's hottest comedian, which meant no season 1 episode carried higher expectations. Chevy Chase had already become a huge star. What happens? It becomes SNL's first Pantheon show. Pryor's monologue, predictably great. Exorcist parody kills. Pryor and Belushi did Samurai Hotel. And everything peaks with word association, which is a sketch that pitted 2 of comedy's biggest stars against one another, Pryor and Chevy Chase, who's the breakout guy for season 1. And thanks to a sizzling performance by Pryor, the racial tension that builds during that sketch still plays 50 years later. It's not a sketch that's aged well, But it's one of the most important SNL moments ever because nobody had ever tried anything like it on live television before. This was dunking from the foul line shit. This was Dr. J in the ABA contest. That was word association. So my favorite SNL episode ever also had my favorite SNL sketch ever and my favorite musical performance ever. This was when Stevie Wonder hosted. And they do this sketch called The Stevie Wonder Experience. This is 8 years after Pryor, 1983. Wonder hosts right as Eddie Murphy is doing this wicked and slightly controversial impression of him. And Eddie's a huge star at this point. You're watching the show live and you're thinking, there's no way Eddie's going to do Stevie in front of Stevie, right? But you're secretly kind of hoping he would. So it finally happens in a sketch with Joe Piscopo, who's playing an agent. He brings in Stevie, who's a celebrity impersonator, and they audition for Murphy, who's a music executive. And the catch is that Stevie's character bills himself as the Stevie Wonder Experience, only he's doing a Stevie impersonation. It's horrible. And Murphy goes, no, you're doing it all wrong, and proceeds to slip on a pair of sunglasses, and the crowd goes batshit. And he does Stevie with Stevie standing right next to him. So I'm 13 when this happened, which is probably the best age to fall in love with SNL, even though I was already in love. And you can think I'm crazy. I don't care. But the most exciting non-sports TV moments of the early 80s were this sketch, Letterman taking a show to LA and having Carson as a guest, Michael Jackson singing Billie Jean and doing the moonwalk on the Motown 25 special, which was amazing. Reagan getting shot by Hinckley, Roddy Piper smashing the coconut in Jimmy Snuka's head, and the premiere of Thriller on MTV, and I can't accept any other arguments. Anyway, Eddie brings the house down with an impression of Stevie singing My Sharia Moore, and he's unbelievably crushes it, kills it. Stevie's standing right there. Crowd settles down. Stevie tries his impersonation again. It's still terrible. Eddie takes over, nails it a second time. Crowd settles down. Scene shifts back to Stevie for one last attempt. And only this time, fake Stevie suddenly turns into real Stevie. And he belts out an a cappella version. You can't even describe how good it is because nobody brought it quite like Stevie in his prime. He nails the last note and the studio erupts like someone made a mid-court shot to win a tournament game. If you watch the tape, Piscopo breaks character. He lets out this delighted yelp. That's how remarkable it was. So I know he's a first ballot Hall of Famer. I know he's a musical icon, but I can't imagine Stevie Wonder ever bringing the house down quite like that. And Eddie pushed him there. Of course, Eddie never breaks character. He waits for the applause to die down. He waits an extra second. And then he finally says, nah, man, it still sucks. Huge laugh, perfect ending, one of the greatest sketches in the history of the show. And at that specific moment, you would bet anything that Murphy would be one of the biggest stars in the world someday. But that's what made him such a unicorn. By sheer coincidence, by dumb luck, an SNL show that desperately needed energy and diversity and a real star stumbled into someone basically created by God to appear on the show. So of the biggest stars in SNL history, only Eddie broke into show business on the show. He was a cast member at 19. He was the show's meal ticket by 20. He was a movie star by 21. And he was a full-fledged super duper star by 22 and headed to Hollywood for good at 23. We will never see it again. He's the most talented SNL cast member ever. He's the only one to host a show when he was starring on it. And for that, and many other reasons, I have Eddie as the SNL GOAT cast member. And I'll fight people in a bar if they want to come up with somebody else. Here's the thing. Only Eddie and Will Ferrell could carry an entire season by themselves. This is like you're using the 2009 LeBron and the Cavs analogy. How many guys could you win 60 games with if they were the only really good guy in the team? That was Eddie and Will Ferrell, and that's really it. So if you're building the hypothetical GOAT SNL cast, I think you have to have Eddie and Ferrell or I can't take the list seriously. It's not negotiable. But what would the rest of the cast look like? Well, three things. First of all, SNL needs to move like a basketball team. You need an 8-man rotation. You need one wild card off the bench. You want enough minutes for everyone. This is always the mistake the show makes over the years when they have these big, fat, swollen casts. You have a 90-minute show with commercials. It's really about 67 minutes of content. You have Weekend Update. You have 2 musical acts. So maybe 5-6 sketches max, plus a couple update things. You don't need 17 people. You need 8, maybe 9. So we'll have the wild card. We'll have the Deion Waiters spot. So that's one. Second, the best SNL cast members can either carry a sketch or glue guy a sketch. And the glue guy thing is super important because that was what Phil Hartman was the best at. You have to be able to do both. You can't just be a one-man show. And in this case, it's a lot like basketball. Can you take over a game? Can you set other people up? Can you play characters? Can you play the straight man? Can you sell other people? Can you do anything? You want a whole cast of these people. Again, you got to think like it's a basketball team. You want the ball to move around. And then the third thing is I was trying to include different eras to the best of my ability. So Eddie and Farrell ran. I got 7 spots left. Phil Hartman was the best glue guy in the show's history. Dana Carvey, who I think is the most underrated male cast member now, he would have thrived on any cast for the entire 15 years and was a force of nature. Same for Bill Hader. So there's 5, and I don't think you can leave any of them off. Eddie, Farrell, Hartman, Carvey, Hader. Best female cast member ever, it's still Gilda Radner. It's not fun to say because she was on the first cast and she kind of had the title to begin with, and then other people probably try to take it from her, not knowing, but she's still the best. She's the best female cast member in the history of the show. Kristen Wiig was right up there, so she's included too. That's 7. And I thought Maya Rudolph was the most underrated female cast member ever. She could carry any type of sketch. She could do all the musical stuff. So that would be my 8. And then obviously for the wild card, I got to have Belushi. So I have Eddie, Farrell, Gilda, Wiig, Hartman, Hader, Carvey, Maya, and Belushi. I'm rocking with those 9. My weekend update guy, Norm Macdonald. Come on. Still living on social media 30 years later. They're still running his jokes from Update. So I have Norm. I'm turning over all digital videos. I'm doing a time machine loop here to Andy Samberg and Adam Sandler. They're just going to work together, even though they're from different eras. Knock yourself out, guys. And then I have the following 10 hosts: Tom Hanks, John Goodman, Steve Martin, Chris Walken, Alec Baldwin, Dave Chappelle, Emma Stone, Ariana Grande, Melissa McCarthy, and Candice Bergen. I think if you're drawing from all the eras, that's the best 10 you're going to come up with. But remember, this is my list. Doesn't mean it's right. I've only been watching the show for my entire life. What do I know? All right, 10 best episodes ever. So these are my 10. They might not be your 10. These are mine. Stevie Wonder, 1983, which had the Stevie Experience, had the Canon camera ad, Dion the hairdresser, and 3 Stevie songs, including him singing Overjoyed, which is the best musical moment in the history of the show. That's one I won't argue about. Go watch it if you don't believe me. The crowd goes nuts and just keeps cheering. It's like a sporting event. So I have that episode. Richard Pryor, 1976, which also had 2 stand-ups from him too. It had Samurai Hotel, Word Association, all the Chevy Weekend Update. That's the first great SNL show. Jim Carrey in 1996, which was the last episode of the aforementioned comeback season. This is Carrey at the peak of his powers. He's coming off, he had The Mask and Ace Ventura. Like he's Dumb and Dumber. He's suddenly one of the biggest movie stars, and SNL had rejected him. So he comes on with a huge chip on his shoulder. He does Fireman Bill, Night at the Roxbury, Joe Pesci show with Jimmy Stewart, does the cheerleaders, does Jacuzzi Lifeguard. Also, you had Norm on Update, who was on fire, and you had a David Spade Hollywood Minute. So this is probably the best show of the last 30 years that they had. And by the way, Soundgarden was the guest. Steve Martin in 1978. This was widely considered to be the best show of the Belushi, Aykroyd, Murray era. Blues Brothers as the musical guest. Steve Martin said it was the peak of me. Actual quote. King Tut did the wordless Gilda dancing scene, Wild and Crazy Guys, Medieval Barber. There was a point-counterpoint on Weekend Update with Jane Curtin and Dan Aykroyd that I always enjoyed when Jane would make her point and then Dan would go, Jane, you ignorant slut. And a joke that would not fly 50 years later, but it was really funny because that's what newscasts were like back then. It was these males just dominating the show and the woman was over there. So they're parodying that. Really funny. Nerd Science Fair was on that as well. All right, 5th one, Tom Hanks in 1988, which I think is in the running for best season opener ever and probably was. This had the Bush Dukakis debate. Dan Aykroyd as Bob Dole, John Lovitz as Dukakis going, I can't believe I'm losing to this guy. So I have that. There's a parody of the movie Big. Dennis Miller's on Update. They do the all-drug Olympics on this one. They played a game show called Jew, Not a Jew. That's actually pretty funny. They did the Girl Watchers thing with Lovitz and Hanks where they're just like, my forehead's just a little too big and all that stuff. Mr. Short-Term Memory, Hans and Franz. Great episode. So this is, I think, the most underrated episode for me. David Allen Greer in 1995. They do the Wake Up and Smile sketch where the teleprompter in the morning show breaks and they all kind of turn on each other, Lord of the Flies style. It's unbelievable. It's one of the 10 best sketches. So that's on there. Spade does Hollywood Minute. Will Ferrell does a Brian Boitano impersonation. Ted Koppel as doing a Michael Jackson, Jack O'Bacco. David Allen Greer plays Brian Gumbel off camera as like this real kind of basically like a crazy hood. It's hilarious. And then Norm was on Update. So I'm putting that one on there. You also had Daryl Hammond on that show as Bill Clinton reviewing American President and talking about how much he loved that the wife died. And then Silverchair was somehow the musical guest. So you have that. William Shatner in 1986. This had Star Trek convention and all-timers, Sweeney Sisters at Christmas, TJ Hooker parody. They had the Star Trek V Restaurant Enterprise. This is one of the top 7 shows ever. They even did A Wonderful Life parody. Tom Hanks in 1990. Hanks with 2 of the top 7 for me. This is the one when Aerosmith came on. Aerosmith was on Wayne's World. Hanks was the groupie doing the sibilance, short-term memory, tales of ribaldry, Girl Watchers, Miller and Update. Probably the best SNL cast of that era. So I have that. I have Eddie Murphy's comeback show in 2019, which was emotional because nobody ever thought he was going to come back after the show made fun of him a couple of times. He finally came back. He did all his old characters, and it was awesome. Christopher Walken in 1992, where he did Trivial Psychic, Perot and Stockdale, The Continental, Stock Talk. There was a Sinead O'Connor parody. There was a Pat sketch. There was a Hollywood Minute, NJ and Brady on Weekend Update, and Arrested Development. So that's my top 10. I also have, as honorable mention, Timberlake in 2006 when he did Dick in a Box and Barry Gibb Show. Lindsay Lohan in 2004 when she was in that famous Debbie Downer sketch. There was also a really funny Harry Potter sketch. Sting in 1991, which had the Sinatra Group in it, some other stuff. Eddie Murphy when he came back to host in 1984. John Goodman in 1998 when this is the episode they did Neil Diamond Storytellers, but he also played Linda Tripp with Monica Lewinsky. There was a morning latte thing. It's just a really good episode, start to finish. And then Adam Sandler, 2018, when he came back, he played the Farley song, which was, I think, one of the most emotional moments in show history. And then Betty White in 2010, when she came back, was really fun. So for my favorite sketches ever, and these are in no particular order, the Tony Bennett Show, the first time Baldwin did this, when he had David Guest and Liza Minnelli on it, lines were crossed. That is still one of the 5 funniest sketches for me. It makes me laugh so hard. They sing a song together. It's making me laugh thinking about it. The Sinatra Group with Phil Hartman, when there was a parody of the McLaughlin Group, and he's got Billy Idol on there and Luther Campbell, and he's just killing everybody. I watched this in college with my buddy Jacko, who was my roommate at the time. We watched it on a Sunday morning after we woke up, and I think we watched it 5 times, and we were talking like Sinatra, yelling at Steve and Edie for the rest of the week. Stevie Wonder Experience, I mentioned. The Neil Diamond Storytellers, that's the one where Will Ferrell is Neil Diamond, just going off the rails and being like, this is a song about my hatred of immigrants. Just incredible stuff. Mr. Belvedere Fan Club. This is a fan club for Mr. Belvedere, Tom Hanks hosting, where they're all deciding how to interact with Mr. Belvedere. And it's really about fan obsession, but it's really, really good. Jackie Rogers Jr., Jackpot Wad. That's with Martin Short. That was the funniest character he played on there. Dysfunctional Family Dinner with Sarah Michelle Gellar, when Will Ferrell with the families like just kind of eating, but then they would yell at each other and calm down. More Cowbell, you know that one. Buckwheat Gets Shot and Buckwheat Died. Those 2 were classics. The first Barry Gibb talk show, I have that one. Debbie Downer at Disney, a classic. Greg the Alien, I think the most underrated Will Ferrell sketch where he's hosting a sports show, but he might be an alien. Star Trek convention with Shatner, when he has all the Star Trek people and he's like, what's wrong with you people? And starts yelling at them. Reagan, the mastermind. Phil Hartman is Reagan. The Referee Pittman Show is one of my most underrated ones. John Goodman as Referee Pittman. It's a talk show, and all the people in the audience are like, hey, Referee Pittman, how do you shove your head up your ass? Is it like, do you have to bend out? And they're just making referee jokes. Chippendale sketch with Chris Farley. Comedy Killers, which was like Jeopardy, but with comedy killers. And then the final answer ends up being the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. Incredible. Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer. Dysfunctional Family Feud. Trivial Psychic. Farley, the first time he did Matt Foley. Nick Cage and Tiny Elvis. Wake Up and Smile, which I mentioned earlier. Night at the Roxbury with Jim Carrey, which was just unbelievable because they had done the sketch a couple times, and then he came in and just physically was somehow outshone both of those guys. Election night 2016. I don't have a lot of ones from the last 10 years just because you got to age with those. But election night 2016 with Chappelle, when everyone at the parties talk about how this is the worst thing that ever happened, and Chappelle's doing Chappelle stuff. Great. And then Bargatze's Washington Dream thing was really good, and they've done 2 of those. But that was, I think, of the last 5 years, probably one of the greats. And then the only other one I forgot to mention was the Joe Montana one, Sincere Guy Stew. And Joe Montana is the biggest star in football, and he's on there, and you could hear his thoughts, and his thoughts were, I'm going to go upstairs and masturbate. And it just was like shocking to hear Joe Montana say that. So that would be my episodes. And then just for the hell of it, musical acts. Best musical performance ever, Stevie Wonder, Overjoyed. Second best, Paul Simon when he sang The Boxer right after 9/11. Really great. Just, I think one of the best moments in the history of the show with all the New York firefighters standing there and Giuliani. It's really special. Queens of the Stone Age when they played Little Sister in 2002 and Pharrell came out and did the cowbell. Amazing. U2 did I Will Follow at the end of an SNL episode in 2004 and ended up like kind of, they broke the fourth wall and kind of went in the audience. That was amazing. The Busboys sang Boys Are Back in Town in 1983, right at Eddie's Apex. And Eddie just went out and sang it with them. And it felt like a moment. Run DMC Walk This Way, 1986. White Stripes, Dead Leaves in 2002, which is just like Jack White and Meg White at their fucking apex. It's awesome. Billy Joel sang Miami 2017 and 1981. It's really good. Nirvana, Teen Spirit, 1992. Blues Brothers, Soul Man, 1978. Really fun to watch still. Outkast sang Mrs. Jackson in 2002. Pearl Jam, Porch in 1992. You know I love that. You know I love Porch and Pearl Jam. Hole was awesome. They sang Violet in 1994. I would encourage you to find any of these, by the way. Billie Eilish, Bad Guy 2019. Visually was amazing. Counting Crows sang Round Here in 1994. And it was their first song, not their second one. And they crushed it. And it basically made them a hit band, which is the power of that show. If you crushed SNL, your albums took off. Sinead O'Connor, Last Day, 1990. Last Day of Our Acquaintance, 1990. The Prince song that was actually her song. And she's incredible in that. And then 2 years later comes back and does the Pope thing and almost commits career suicide. Although now I think it's played out better for her. Kendrick in 2014 sang I, and it's great. Bowie did The Man Who Ruled the World in 1979, which was, I think, one of the coolest visual ones. Eminem and Dre sang Still in 1999, and it's awesome. And then the last one I would recommend, if you want to go look up any of these, is Stevie Nicks' Stand Back in 1983, because there's some guy that is dancing during the performance. You'll know it when you see it. It's a moment unlike anything ever in the show. And also it's a really good song. So that's what I got. Those are all my SNL thoughts. I can't wait to watch SNL 50. If you want to read what I thought about SNL 40, it's in the Grantland archives actually from 10 years ago. But that's it. Those are all my thoughts. I word dumped them out to you on the pod and on the YouTube. You can watch me actually stumble through this. So there you go.